Shalom and welcome to Yeshiva B'nai Noach and our presentation of this course, Teach Yourself to Read Hebrew. This is the textbook we'll be using for the class, although we'll be featuring portions of the pages from this book in our presentation. I do ask that you purchase the textbook for copyright purposes, as it would be, of course, inappropriate for both of us to not allow the publisher and authors their due. I've chosen this book for its ease of use and wonderful practice exercises. It's also a perfect lead-in if you choose to continue learning, as the next level book will be also by the same authors, or pretty much the same authors, entitled First Hebrew Primer. Now, you can purchase this book or First Hebrew Primer on Amazon or many other bookseller sites. Please do not start this course until you purchase the book. It's a small price to pay for what you'll learn from it, and also with my help, since I don't charge for teaching this and I make myself available to you 24/7 by email, given in the description page. I'll give you that email address. I'll also be making references at times to other writings or presentations. It's not necessary to purchase any other text, but if you have an interest, I will also provide links to other works discussed here.
The first thing to realize is that Hebrew is written from right to left, as are most Semitic or Eastern languages. Although this is not so much true today, but at one time there was an interesting flow to Eastern and Western languages, exemplified by the comment that all languages flow to Jerusalem. Generally speaking, all languages east of Jerusalem read right to left, flowing into Jerusalem, and all languages west of Jerusalem read left to right, also flowing to Jerusalem. That's just one of many miraculous understandings of this incredible language. According to the Oxford Dictionary, a dead language is, quote, a language which is no longer in everyday spoken use. Until it became the language of Israel, Hebrew was on that list. After it became the only dead language to date ever to be revived. One man is credited with enabling that feat, Eliezer ben Yehuda, lived from 1858 to 1922. He was a Russian Jewish linguist and journalist. He was the editor of the Jerusalem-based newspaper, the first paper based in Jerusalem, Ha-Zvi. It was published in the land of Israel. He's quoted as saying, quote, there are two things without which the Jews would not be a nation, their land and their language. He established Ba'ad HaLashon, the forerunner of the Academy of the Hebrew Language. He began work on the first Hebrew dictionary, which was completed in 1959, 3 decades after his death, but the first version of a modern Hebrew dictionary was published in 1920, around the same time as Yehuda's dream became a reality and Hebrew became an official language of the British-ruled Palestine, along with English and Arabic. So the language of Abraham and his children and all other languages from that time um, are dead, other than the language of Abraham and his descendants. It's an interesting. There's an interesting quote. It says, "More than the Jew has kept the Sabbath has kept the Jew." I would beg to offer another version of that I think is just as appropriate. More than the Jew has kept Hebrew, Hebrew has kept the Jew. I think the language is very, very important, and we'll take a look at some of the reasons why. Hebrew itself could be considered the mother of all alphabets. Hebrew Phoenician alphabet is considered probably the first alphabet to be discovered. And English, as I'll show you in just a moment, is a direct descendant of that alphabet. The Phoenicians were the northern neighbors and cousins to the Hebrews, and they were credited by many scholars with the development of the first alphabet. But most likely they were simply the seafaring peoples who spread the alphabet. They took it to the Greeks, and the Greeks to the Latins. Let's take a look now at the evolution of the Hebrew letters to Greek and to Latin. This is an interesting chart here that will show you that. So just briefly, the columns that you're looking at here, um, the names of the letters here, the Old Hebrew, which is the system that was actually used to translate to the Greeks, and we'll show you that here in just a minute. And then we have the Aramaic column, we have the cursive column here, and then Rashi script, which is somewhat different. Again, we're not going to be talking about all of those things, but just to show you here the usage. So again, we have the evolution from the old Hebrew script. The Aramaic script was developed by Ezra the scribe after the Babylonian exile, about 500 before the Common Era. So the Greeks simply took the letters with sounds they didn't need and converted them to vowels. So we have here Aleph, which in Hebrew is actually, in modern Hebrew, is a silent letter. It had an unusual sound in ancient Hebrew. So the Greeks didn't need that one. So they made the Aleph the letter A. So that became their vowel A. But notice another thing too. Again, the Old Hebrew script here, the Old Hebrew symbol, was actually the symbol for an ox. You can kind of see an ox head right there. But what happens, if you look at it closely, you can see very clearly how the letter A came from that symbol. So it simply turned itself and became upright here and became the letter A. Again, you have to do this with the Old Hebrew, not the Aramaic script. Again, the same thing with the bet. In many cases, it becomes a mirror image. So the bet closes itself here, flips around, and becomes the B sound. So again, some interesting evolutions that you can see here in terms of that. Now, the Greeks simply took the Hebrew letters, as I said, and they converted some of them to vowels that they didn't need. There were no vowels in the Hebrew language. Again, we'll talk about all of this in more detail later. But the Hebrew language is written without vowels initially. Now, the vowel signs themselves were added. They're called nakud. They were added around 600 to 1100 of the Common Era by the Masoretes. It's called the Masoretic texts that include the vowels. That's most of the Torahs, the Tanakhs that you read today that have the vowels in them. It's thanks to the Masoretes. The Hebrews didn't need the vowels. The Phoenicians didn't need the vowels. The Greeks, however, felt uncomfortable without them, so they had to add in vowels in the main body of the text. So again, we'll take a look at all of that as we continue on here. But just recognize the evolution that took place here. Very fascinating to see. And in some cases, and again, the Greeks had the exact same order for the most part, not necessarily the same sound, but the same order. So Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet becomes Alpha, Beta, Delta, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta. Same order. But again, that's just they took that from the Phoenicians who had the Old Hebrew alphabet going here. So we've shown you that Hebrew is the basis of all languages. At least that's one theory, and that it is certainly the forerunner of the Greek and the Latin, which is our language or our alphabet. It's also the perfect language. Why do I say that? Well, if you were going to design a perfect language, what would it be? According to one person, J.R.R. Tolkien, who was among other things a linguist or language professor at Oxford, thought he knew the answer to that question. In designing his own language spoken by the elves in Lord of the Rings, he chose Hebrew as the basis of his elvish tongue. So again, kind of a shout out to Hebrew from J.R.R. Tolkien. So let's take a look now at vowels and why the Greeks had a problem with it and why the Hebrews did not. Most of the information in the following two slides comes from the book How the Hebrew Language Grew by Edward Horowitz. So the idea for the Greeks, they complained to the Phoenicians that they needed vowels, but for the Phoenicians and Hebrews, there was no need. All words for the in the Hebrew language then and now using the same consonants carry similar and connected meanings. It was a three-consonant system called the triconsonantal, and those three consonants, again, vary. Sometimes they're less or more than three, but basically all words in Hebrew have that three-consonant root. And those roots, as I'll show you in a little bit here, were connected. But for the Greeks, this wasn't so, and it wasn't possible for them. So, and later, of course, the Latins that took a lot of the information from the Greeks and created their alphabet. The change in vowels for the Greeks and the Latins can drastically change the meaning of the word. Let's take a look at that in a little more detail. So here you see two consonants that are from the English alphabet. We have the R and the D. The thing to point out here is if you just saw those two consonants in a script without any vowels, you really would have no way of knowing without looking at context, possibly, and possibly even not then, what those two letters represent. You have to have the vowels, and here's why. Because if you put vowels in here, we have raid, we have read, we have read with two E's, or ready, or read, or ride, or rid. All of these words have completely different meanings. You have to have the vowels in place in order to see what the R and the D mean. Okay, that's in our system of language. How is it different from the Hebrews? We'll take a look at that next. As I said before, Hebrew is a triconsonantal language. It takes three consonants to make a root for a word. So here we see three consonants of kaf, dalet, and shin. Those three letters represent the root for the word holiness, being holy. Now, if you take those three letters and you put different vowels in there, you're going to get a different word, but they're all going to be related to holiness. So, for instance, kadosh is a holy person, adding the a and the o. We have kodesh, which is holiness, adding the o and the e. We have kaddish, which is the mourner's prayer, and that has to do with someone who's lost something, someone who's holy. And then we have kiddush, which is a prayer declaring holiness. So again, those three letters become, with or without vowels, you know that somehow it's related to holiness or being holy. So that is the important distinction. So it's for this reason that it is indeed quite possible. In fact, it's easy for a person with a fair knowledge of Hebrew to read Hebrew without vowel sounds. Now, the importance here, and we'll talk about this later, the importance is to Hebrew, it's extremely important to have a vocabulary, because without that basic vocabulary understanding, then that makes it a lot more difficult to learn each of the words. But if you have that basic vocabulary, you're going to be able to see again anything with these three letters is going to have a relationship to holiness. If you know that the root, if you've learned the root, then you can pretty much work out the rest. And well, I will talk about something else too later on. In terms of the mystical aspects of the language, and there are many aspects of that we can take a look at. Probably not completely in this course. That would be out of the scope of what we're doing, but know that exists, and that's one of the beautiful parts of the Hebrew language. So let's have a little bit of fun with Hebrew. The question that had often arisen in terms of the Torah is that there are a lot of donkeys in the Torah. So the rabbis asked the question, why? It's not always necessary to know that there were donkeys in a particular scene. Genesis 22, we have the sacrifice of Isaac, includes two references to donkeys. After the burning bush, we have Zechariah, behold, thy king comes to you. He's just and victorious, humble, and riding on an ass. And then Numbers 22, 28 and 38, So all of these and many, many, many more are stories that contain donkeys. So the question is, why? What was the significance of donkeys? So what the rabbis did is they looked at, again, the letters of the word. What is the Hebrew word for donkey? Well, it's chamor, but it's nearly identical to another word, chomer. Chomer. But you see, the chet, the mem, and the resh are all part of the same construction here. Both contain those three consonants. Again, what I said before is the consonants, if you see the three together, there's a relationship between them. Sometimes it's not as obvious as others. So in this case, the rabbis looked at the word chamor, meaning material substance, and they derived from that when a donkey is mentioned in Scripture, it's referring to a situation where material substance, dependence on material goods, is either a problem or it's something that the person involved has overcome. So we see this description of the Messiah coming humble and riding on an ass. Well, one of the interpretations or understandings of that is that whoever the Messiah is, he will have overcome any greed or any problems with the material world. So that's one way to take a look at it and have a little bit of fun, if you will, with the Hebrew language. So let's take a look now at a little reverse psychology. What happens when we reverse the letters in a word? Again, in English, it becomes gobbledygook, but in Hebrew, there are important things that you can learn from reversing the letters and the reasons that you reverse it. again, outside the scope of what we're doing here. But for instance, here we have Laban, who is the antagonist in the story for Jacob. And if you reverse the letters, so here we have Laban, and then you reverse it. So the nun, again, the nun looks different here, but trust me, it's the same letter. So the nun now becomes first, and you have Naval, which means villain, which indeed gives a description of Laban or Laban. So oftentimes we look at someone's name in Torah, and it's not necessarily their name, perhaps, as much as it is a description of who they were and their relationship in the story. Again, some interesting ways to look at it. Moses, we reverse the letters of his name. So Mem, Shin, He is Moshe. If we take He, Shin, Mem, again, the Mem looks different, but trust me, it's the same letter. If we take if we reverse Moses' name, we get Hashem, which means the name, which is what we use to sometimes refer to God. So again, we see that connection between Moses and God in the name itself. Taking a look at Moses in front of the fiery bush, the thorny bush, called a sneh. The sneh reversed. This is Samek Nun He, reversed to He Nun Samek, becomes Ha-nes, which means the miracle. A miracle indeed took place with the burning bush. Roa, evil, becomes Ever, blind. Osher, riches, becomes Resha, which is iniquity or injustice. So people that misuse riches turn it around. That creates iniquity and injustice. Mavet, death. If you turn it around, it becomes Tam, which is purity. So the Met, the Mem Tav for death becomes Tav and Mem for purity. Okay. Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet, called Aleph, is also the letter of God. If you turn Aleph around from Aleph Lamed Pei to Pei Lamed Aleph, you get Pele, wonder. So God is a wonder. Again, the relationship between the letters are the same, different meanings, but there's a relationship between the two of them. And finally, taking a look at Noach, It says Noach found favor in the eyes of God. Well, there's a play on his word here, because Noach, when reversed, means favor. So we have Noach, which is nun chet, and then chet nun is the reverse of it. So there's again that play, but without knowing Hebrew, you wouldn't understand a lot of the things, the deeper meanings that are necessary to understand as you begin to read Torah and Tanakh and try and read it with understanding. So I want to take a look here, and we're not going to spend much time with this at all, but I just wanted to point it out to you. If we do the mystical Hebrew class, we'll be looking at this in a lot more detail. The rabbis say that there are 70 faces to the Torah. There are 70 ways. 70 just means a great number of ways that you can interpret every single word and every single letter in the Torah. That's the spiritual aspect, the mystical aspect of the Hebrew letters. So there are 4 ways that are used to define every single letter. You can look at its name. You can look at the first time that letter appears in the Torah as a word. It might appear as a prefix to a word, but that doesn't count. But the first time it appears as a word, and what that word is, gives you a hint as to the meaning of the letter, the shape of the letter, and the gematria of the letter. I want to spend a little bit of time looking at that. So let's take a look at this chart here. It's backwards. It should be reading right to left, but at any rate, it shows you the numerical value. Every single letter in Hebrew, all 22 letters in Hebrew, have a numerical value assigned to it. So here we have Aleph at 1, goes through Yod, which is 10, and then we have Kaf at 20, and that takes us in increments of 10. After that, Lamed 30, Mem 40, Nun 50, etc., through Kuf, which is 100, and then Resh is 200, Shin 300, Tav 400. So again, every letter in the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical value. Why is this important? Well, because that is yet another way that you can determine the deeper meanings behind words as well as the letters themselves. Again, we're not going to spend much time with this, but know that this is an important part of understanding Hebrew and why it is important to understand Hebrew. So let me give you a few examples here. So let's have a little fun with Hebrew. In Deuteronomy 15, verses 7 through 11, it says, "If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. For the poor you will have with you always in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land." Again, this is a very important concept in Torah, very important mitzvah for Judaism, the mitzvah of tzedakah, of charity, of giving. So let's take a look at that in terms of gematria and see what we can see. So here's an interesting thing to look at. The Hebrew word for rich is osher. Its numerical value is 580. The Hebrew word for poor, a poor person, is ani. Its numerical value is 130. What happens if you subtract 130 from 580? What happens if you have a poor person that is taken care of by the rich person? The leftover number, 130 from 580, is 450. What word has a numerical value of 450? It is, one of the words is the word tan, which means give. Give. So the lesson through gematria that we learn from this is that the importance of giving makes the difference between a poor person and a rich person. So the difference between a rich man and a poor man is the difference of benevolent giving. Again, a lot of depth here, a lot of depth that we're not going to go into. But the point is, that this is the power, the incredible power of the Hebrew language, and why it's so important in my mind that it should be learned. So again, gematria, just one of many ways of working with the Hebrew letters to get a deeper meaning and a deeper lesson out of it. So, an interesting concept here, or thing to recognize. Now, this has been trivialized by the magicians of the world, if you will, but you've all heard the phrase abracadabra from any movie that you've seen with a magician, or any magician performance that you've been to. Usually that word comes up, abracadabra. It is a Hebrew word, and it has a very deep and powerful meaning. The meaning is, or the word is, abracadabra. Abracadabra. And it means I will create, I will create as I speak, as I will speak. I will create as I will speak. Again, to recognize the importance of the Hebrew language, the power of the Hebrew language. I'm going to talk about this in more detail here in just a moment. But see that this is the essence of what we're talking about in terms of mystical Hebrew. Hebrew is the language of creation. Every letter, every word has a spiritual force and power behind it. So it's another reason why, you might ask yourself, okay, because I guarantee you that you can learn to read Hebrew after we're done with this course. But what benefit is that to you if you don't know the words, if you don't know the vocabulary? Hopefully you'll spend time learning them. But even if you didn't, there's a mystical concept that just reading the Hebrew, even without understanding, just reading it, there's power and there's blessing that comes from that. Why? Because again, this is the language of creation. Your soul already knows Hebrew. Your spirit knows Hebrew. So when you read it, something can happen within you. If you read it again with that desire to learn and that desire to be be uh, be given the understanding and wisdom from Hashem, from God, and in terms of it. So please keep that in mind as we learn this. And as you say to yourself, it's going to take me years to translate Hebrew. That may be true, but that doesn't negate the importance of just learning to read it. And that's the point I want to make here. So to kind of wrap up this introduction to the language, and I mentioned the power of the Hebrew, I want to give you some information. This comes from a teaching, a discussion by Ephraim Palvanov, and I highly recommend any video you can find from him. I'll put a link in the description. But the article, or the video, is called Noah's Ark and the Tower of Babel, Not What You Think. I'm going to say some pretty outrageous things here regarding Hebrew, but I want to refer you to Ephraim's video to see his proofs, and you can decide. So I'm not going to, it would take way too long, and again, it's out of the scope of what we're doing here to go into all of the details. But I want you to know that there is one opinion about the power and importance of a Hebrew, an opinion that is very strongly rooted in rabbinic and Judaic Kabbalistic concepts, and that is regarding the Genesis 11 story of the Tower of Babel, a story we've all read, most likely. You all know the story, and you kind of pass over it because it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And we're going to talk about why it makes a whole lot of sense. So the Genesis 11 story of the tower and the confounding of the language, Torah says that at that time, this is right after the ark settled and civilization, mankind began to replenish, themselves and formed a civilization, if you will. And at that point, then, Torah says there was one people and one language. And that's very significant. One people and one language. But as the story continues, as this group of people goes into the valley of Shinar and decides to build a tower to God, and we read it. Apparently, God was concerned. I mean, was God afraid? Why? Why was God concerned about this? Surely not because of a tower. What would be about a tower that would be so concerning to God? So what was actually going on here? Well, the Zohar, which is a book of Kabbalah, the mystical aspect of Judaism, Zohar 176a, gives an explanation. They found secrets. These people found secrets buried in Shinar from the pre-flood generation. What did they find? They found a way, a text, if you will, a script on how to use the Hebrew language that they all knew and use it as the language of creation. Again, everyone spoke the language, so that it was easy then to use this information manual, if you will, and they learned how to create and manipulate angels. To create and manipulate anything they wanted. They could create using the Hebrew language. It had that much power. It was that power that ended in the destruction of the world and the flood of Noah. So here are these people, once again, about to destroy themselves and the world by using a power they had no concept or understanding of. That's what God was concerned about. So using that find, these people, led by Nimrod, they felt that they could rebel against God and actually succeed. Now, the Arizal, a great rabbi who taught a lot about the mystical aspects of Judaism, asked the question, so why does God feel threatened? Not for himself, but for those men who don't understand the power they are dealing with. They would be like little children who find their way into a dangerous part of a house or a dangerous part of someplace. So the parents have to change the locks, if you will, to keep the child out for his own good. This is essentially what was going on here. Since they knew the secrets of creation through the Hebrew language, which could force, apparently, again, according to the story, the Midrash, not from the Torah, but from the rabbinic sources, they could use Hebrew to force angels to do their bidding. We know some of this from the story of Solomon, who also used angels to build the temple, apparently. Again, not Torah, but based in rabbinic teachings. So they reasoned, these people, if they could use names in Hebrew to control angels, perhaps they could also control God. So now we begin to see the real problem here. And the solution to that problem. So Arizal refers to the times of Enosh and pre-flood, as I mentioned earlier. They knew how to use divine names, and they actually started idol worshiping, not necessarily because they were just simply looking at a tree and saying, "Oh, how wonderful," but they actually created idols. They actually created beings, demons, if you will, through the use of Hebrew. So again, we come back to this tower story and we see the incredible danger that mankind was in at this point. And oftentimes you read the story of the Tower of Babel and you say to yourself, you know, if the punishment, God's punishment always fits the crime, if you will. So how does the confounding of languages fit the crime? Well, now this makes some sense. The confounding of the languages was in order to take away the knowledge of the holy tongue, of Hebrew, to change their understanding, that they would now forget completely and totally the Hebrew language. Okay, there are several apocryphal texts. We won't spend a lot of time there, but they have a lot of information about all of this. And perhaps, I mean, there's some understanding that the apocryphal texts are apocryphal. In other words, they weren't included in the canon of the Bible, mainly because, or one aspect of the reason because, that they contained a lot of this information that we needed to be protected from. So, and it's the same reason that has been given by Judaism throughout the years as to why you shouldn't study mystical Hebrew. You shouldn't study Kabbalah. Because, again, the danger is that hidden within the knowledge of mystical Hebrew and Judaism is the idea of this creation. So the Hebrew language was restored through Abraham, we understand, and it was named Ivrit because Abraham was called the Eber, the Hebrew. So again, Zohar says that God first confounded and then scattered them. Not remembering the Hebrew language made them weak. So without Hebrew, they became weak and unable to have any kind of great spiritual power. And this is, and remember earlier I said that you could just read Hebrew because you have a memory of it in your mind, in your ancestry. That memory of the Hebrew has always been there. And according to the rabbis in the Messianic age, not just the rabbis, according to the prophets, in the Messianic age, God will transform the language of the nations to a pure language. And what do you think that pure language will be? It will be Hebrew. One interesting other side note here is, what was the Tower of Babel? What was it? Was it a building? Well, the Talmud in Chagiga 15b says an interesting comment. It says it was a flying tower. And Rashi, it doesn't say that the Tower of Babel was a flying tower. It just talks about a flying tower. But Rashi, commenting on that verse, says that it was referring to the Tower of Babel. Rav Yonatan Abishutz, 18th century, said they wanted to build a tower which was actually an elevator in order to launch a ship into space. So again, all of this is kind of strange and unusual and has nothing to do with what we're going to be learning here, but I just thought it would be fun to point that out to you as one possible understanding of the Tower of Babel story and how it does relate to the importance of the Hebrew language. All right, as we conclude now this preliminary section before we get to the book itself, and I do apologize the class is taking so long, but it's longer than usual. But it is a video, so you can stop and start it as you need to. I want to conclude with a quote or some quotes from a book by Blair Kasfeldt entitled Biblical Hebrew Made Easy. The emphasis or the idea here, the talk here has to do with why we mentioned vocabulary as an important part of learning Hebrew. That's not the scope of this course, but as you learn and begin to learn, it may be daunting to you to think of how many words you're going to need to learn. So I want to quote from Kasfeldt, and I think that will ease a little bit some of those fears. And here's what he had to say. When it comes to learning a language, mastery of vocabulary obviously is necessary. The joy of reading a language is killed when you have to look up every word in the text. I believe this is why so many students simply give up or grind through Hebrew just to pass so they never have to look at the language again. When I interviewed Dr. Reverend Walter Meyer III, professor of Hebrew at Concordia Theological Seminary, he stated that vocabulary is essential for learning Hebrew. It's the foundational building block of learning Hebrew. Of course, I agree. Interestingly, he also stated that Hebrew grammar will fall into place once a certain level of mastery is gained over the vocabulary of biblical Hebrew. What was not discussed in our interview was how many vocabulary words in Hebrew should the student have mastery over. And here he talks about the law of diminishing returns. The law of diminishing returns states the tendency for a continuing application of effort or skill toward a particular project or goal to decline in effectiveness after a certain level of result has been achieved. And this is true, Kasfeldt says, for learning biblical Hebrew vocabulary as well. There are 419,687 words in the Hebrew Old Testament text. Of those words, 8,679 are unique. So that's quite a difference, and already that should be encouraging. 8,679 words that are unique that compose the total usage of those words. So the question is, how many of the 8,679 words do I need to have absolute mastery over to have competency in biblical Hebrew? Of course, competency is subjective, but if you wanted to recognize nearly 90% of all the word occurrences in the Hebrew text, the answer would be 22% of the 8,679 words. That means you would need to know a mere 1,903 Hebrew vocabulary words, which is not an unrealistic amount of vocabulary to master in a year or less with dedication. But for some, this will still seem daunting or not worth the investment of time and effort. If this is true to you, keep reading for the good news. 80% recognition, less is more, he says. Keep the law of diminishing returns in mind. The more Hebrew vocabulary you learn, the better. But at some point, the returns diminish after a certain number of vocabulary words are memorized. In my opinion, this is where it gets really fun. In my opinion, that magic number is 641. That's far less than 1,903. In fact, that number seems entirely possible to memorize. And guess what? With mastery of a mere 641 Hebrew words, you'll have over 80% recognition of Hebrew vocabulary in the Old Testament text. After learning 641 of the highest frequencies, the law of diminishing return kicks in. That's good news for Hebrew students. So again, all of that from Blair Kasfeldt's book entitled Hebrew Vocabulary, Biblical Hebrew Made Easy. Blair Kasfeldt, I'll put a link in to the book, which is when he does give you those 690 words, 641 words that you have to learn in that book, and some ways to learn them. So another interesting place to go after this course to take a look at. So let's take a look now at the book we'll be using, Teach Yourself to Read Hebrew, Revised Edition. And right before we get into the book itself, just some other minor comments. We've looked at a lot of reasons that I've presented as to why studying biblical Hebrew is important. And here's a few more. So imagine living with a spouse who spoke a different language than you and only communicating through a translator. That was the only way you could communicate. The Hebrew Bible is God's letter to us, and we should make every effort to understand it. There's a rabbinic saying that goes, more than the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews. And as I mentioned before, you could substitute Hebrew for Sabbath and it would still be true. Consider the many miracles of the language that we've discussed and talked about. It's a language filled with mystical secrets. It's called the language of creation and believed by ancient and modern mystics to hold secrets to creating and manifesting what we speak. Proverbs 25:2 says, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the honor of kings to search out a matter." Hebrew is what has been concealed, and it is incumbent upon us to understand it. The Hebrew Bible is filled with coincidences. These are proofs of the incredible design of the language, whose form, number, and usage of each letter speaks to the existence of divine or supernatural intervention. Our spouse that we talked about at the beginning is Hashem, is God. And we are his spouse. The point is that his language is Hebrew. There's no question in my mind, and I think you can find proof after proof that there's only one language on earth today that carries the mystical and powerful spiritual depth, and that language is Hebrew. So, if we want to communicate with God, then it's important to communicate in Hebrew. Can you translate one to another? Yes, but is it as fun? I don't believe so. So let's take a look now at the book, Teach Yourself to Read Hebrew. At the beginning of the book, it covers some comparisons between English and Hebrew. English read from left to right, and of course, Hebrew from right to left. 26 letters in the English alphabet, including the vowels A, E, I, O, U, and some are consonants B, C, D, G, etc. In Hebrew, there are 22 letters, all of which are consonants. Vowels are dots and dashes added below and beside the consonants. English has both capital and small letters. There are no capital letters in Hebrew. English letters are never written differently when they appear at the end of a word. There are 5 Hebrew letters that have a different form when they appear at the end of the word, and it's impossible to learn to read English without knowing the meaning of words, because letters and letter combinations can be pronounced in so many different ways. Examples: the letter C in the words cat and circle, and the letter off in the words through and cough. So that's English. In Hebrew, however, Hebrew consonants and vowels are always pronounced the same. So that makes it easy. Therefore, it's possible to learn to read Hebrew without knowing the meaning of words. This book has 10 chapters. We're going to go through one chapter for each class, each lesson. And today we'll finish up with lesson 1 as we look through it. In this class, we'll learn 3 letters, 3 consonants, and 2 vowels. Now, these consonants we're going to learn today will actually be repeated. The purpose, and I've seen this in many Hebrew textbooks, beginning textbooks, the purpose is to get you started with your first word in Hebrew. So we'll see how that goes as we go through this. In the next chapter, we'll be looking at 4 different letters. One letter has 2 ways to pronounce itself. And then we'll look at 2 vowels again, and then etc. It'll just go on like that. I'll let you take a look through each of the chapters. So we'll do again one chapter at a time, getting through the final chapter in chapter 10. Also note the answers to all of the exercises are in the book as well. I do encourage you not to use this until after you've answered the questions, or at least attempted to answer the questions as you go through the book on your own. Okay, so we will not be. I will give you the answers to the exercises as well, or at least I'll be reading the exercises as we go through this. But I'll let you do that on your own, and again, you can find the answers here as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Or put a note in the comments section, and I'll get back with you on that. In the back of the book, note that there is a section that you could cut out that would be these cards that show you the alphabet, the aleph-bet, and they'll give you, similar to the chart I showed you earlier on, but they'll give you the Aramaic, the Hebrew, modern Hebrew script here in this column. The pronunciations are in the far left side. The name of the letter. Here in the middle, this is the final forms of 5 of the letters. Again, we'll talk about all of this as we go through it. Now, this is the I guess book form of the letters. For your writing purposes, and we're not going to do a lot of writing here. We're going to skip a lot of those exercises, but you can do them on your own. And the book does show you how to write each of the letters. You certainly don't have to have penmanship skills to do the letters here, but there's another way to write them. The other thing we're not going to do in this class, this is the column that shows you the script. In modern Hebrew, people writing letters, whatever else in Hebrew that isn't printed, will generally use the script form in order to write. I personally find it just as easy to write the block letters here. Excuse me. So the other thing is the gematria we talked about. Again, Aleph through Yod is 10. And then Kaf through Kuf is multiples of 10 to 100, and then resh, shin, and tav, 200, 300, and 400. So you can keep all of this handy if you need it, and take a look at it. Also on that back page, the same page with the letters, you'll see a list of the vowels, and we'll be going through all of these. As noted earlier, each of these vowels are dots and dashes, essentially, that are beneath the words, and we'll again explain those as we go. And we have the traditional vowel sounds, the e, a, o, oo, and then some unusual vowels. We have one that is an O sound that looks like the but it's not, and we'll talk about the rules of that in our last chapter here. And then we'll also spend a chapter talking about what's called the shava. The shava are two dots that appear underneath a letter, and they can either be silent or have a very short sound. There are some rules surrounding that, and we'll talk about that. But all of that then is at the back of your book. So let's start with chapter 1 now in your book, and we're looking at 3 letters here. And as we continue on, as I said, we're going to look at these letters again. I'll spend a little more time on each one, but right now let me just introduce it to you. And this dot here is important. Again, in a manuscript that doesn't have vowels, this dot won't appear, nor will this dot. But for right now, as we're learning the language, it's important to recognize that this letter could have a dot in it. It's called a dagesh, or it may not. With the dot, this is a B sound. This is bet. This is the B sound. And remember that. And then this is the shin, SH sound, with the dot here on the right. And then you have the last letter of the alphabet, tav here. So bet, shin, tav, the 3 letters. And as your book tells you, in Hebrew there are 22 different consonants. And the 3 we have here again, B as in boy, sh as in shape, and T as in tall. Bet, shin, tav. And then we have the first 2 vowels that we'll be looking at. Let me point this out to you also. The PowerPoint presentation used here doesn't always go in the same order as the book. It usually does, but I do try and put the page numbers down here. If you're trying to follow along in your book, that would be the page number. So this is page 4. So you can find this information on page 4. So the first 2 vowels that we're going to look at, and as we mentioned before, the vowels or pointed system were added by the Masoretes, a family of scribes, about the 6th century of the Common Era. And the reason that they added the vowels is that there was some concern that the proper pronunciation of Hebrew would be lost in exile. Again, this language was taught orally. The oral, just as the oral law was important to be taught from person to person, so too the Hebrew language. So that as people were learning the language and being taught the language, they were being taught the words. And with the words, of course, the pronunciation. Without those teachers, this was the fear that the Masoretes had, that while we were in exile, we wouldn't have person-to-person teachers or have the ability to have that. So again, the idea of the vowels came about, but there's a law, a Torah law, that we weren't to change the Torah. The Torah was given to Moses on Sinai without vowels. It was written with consonants, no vowels, just as the Torah scrolls today are written without vowels. So they couldn't change the Torah. They couldn't change the letters and the words. So they did the next best thing. They added the vowels below or above the consonants so that they wouldn't disturb the consonants themselves. So the consonant is always pronounced first, except when it's at the end of a word. There are times when it's not pronounced first, and we'll go over that as we come to it. So again, the importance of the vowels here, again, the dots and dashes. I often wonder, I've never read that this is true, but if our system of Morse code and the telegraph wasn't all designed around the same concept of using dots and dashes in place of not only the vowels, but the letters as well. Anyway, who knows? But here we talk about A-class vowels. These are the ah vowels, A-class vowels. In Hebrew, there are two. A is in yacht, so it's the ah sound. And both of them, the patak, which is the straight line, and the kamatz, which looks like a little T, both of them have the same sound, the ah sound. Now, technically, the straight line is short and the T is long, again, the patak and the kamatz. But the long vowels are given a little more emphasis. But in modern Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, there is a difference between them, but we're not learning that. We're learning biblical Hebrew, but with modern Hebrew pronunciations. So in modern Hebrew, there's only one sound for both of these vowels, and that's ah. Now, and we may talk about this later as we get through it, but there is some difference in Ashkenazic and Sephardic pronunciations and Yemenite pronunciations. I may mention them as we go. This is one of the places where there is a difference in the two vowels. But again, for what we're learning here, let's keep it simple, and we're just pronouncing these as an ah sound. If you're familiar, if you're from the Ashkenazic or Sephardic or Yemenite group and want to learn them your way, then by all means, please do so. That's our look at the two vowels that we have for this lesson. So, as we mentioned, always pronounce the consonant first and then the vowel. Consonant first and then the vowel. There'll be a few exceptions to this, but we'll talk about those when we get to it. But for the most part, the consonant first and then the vowel. So this would be ba, ba, ba. This would be sha, sha, sha. This would be ta, ta, ta. Again, when a Hebrew vowel is written underneath a Hebrew consonant, pronounce the consonant first and then the vowel. Always read the Hebrew from right to left. Just get in the habit of doing that. So you would pronounce, in this case, you have the shin and the ah. So you're putting them together and you get the sound sha. Sh plus ah equals sha. So now we have a look at our first exercise here, and the exercise is reading the following combination of letters and vowels that were introduced in this lesson. Always read the Hebrew from right to left. So here's what I'll do is I'm going to pause just very briefly so you can turn the recording off. I would like for you first on your own to try and read through all of these letter and vowel combinations. I will then read them here. Then you can pause the video again and then keep practicing until you can read them fluently, as fluently as possible all the way across. So if you want to pause the video now and practice, go ahead. And let's go through line 1. We have b, the b sound. We have ba. We have ba. We have ba. We have b. We have ba, we have ba, we have ba, and we have ba. Actually, let me get a better pointer here. Go through it. So line 2, then we have sh, the sh sound. We have sha, sh, sha, sh, sha, sha, sha. Line 3, t sound. We have ta, 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 t, ta, 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 ta. Line 4, we have ta, sha, ba, ba, sha, ta, sha, ba, ta. Line 5, we're going to put some letters together now. We have ta, we have tot. Again, no vowel under the last consonant, so that's, we end with that consonant. So tot. And then we have bob. And then we have shosh. And then we have shab. And then we have shot. Shot. So again, if there's no vowel under the last consonant, and there usually isn't, then you end just with the consonant sound. Line 6, we have bosh, bot, tosh. We have tab. We have shab, and we have bosh. So again, please stop the video again and go through this until it's easier and easier for you to go through the pronunciation. So here they have a writing exercise, and again, we're not going to spend time in this class going over the writing exercises, but I encourage you to do them. It is a better way, a nicer way. Well, it's another way to learn the letters. So as you get the practice of writing and saying them out loud, it helps reinforce your knowledge. So I do encourage you to do that. But otherwise, we're going to go through this the same way we went through the last page, and that is pause the video, try and pronounce them yourself, and then start the video, and I'll go through the pronunciation of each one, and then pause the video again and do them again, and make sure that you are comfortable reading each and every one of them. Okay? So go ahead and pause the video now. Line 1, then, we have sha, we have ba, we have ba, we have sha, we have ta, we have ba, we have sha, we have ba, we have ta, we have ta. Line 2, shosh, tot, bob, shosh, tot, bob. Line 3, we have shot, bosh, tosh, bosh, tob, and shab. Go ahead and practice those again. So here again on this page, we're going to do the same things we've been doing. This is on exercise 5, and we've skipped a few of the exercises that were writing exercises. But exercise 5 here, again, we're going to read the consonants and vowels and go through each line. So stop the video, try and do it on your own, then start the video, listen to me going across it, and then stop the video again and work on it on your own. So go ahead and stop the video. And let's start it here. We have sh, sha, sha, sha. So see, we have a vowel under the last letter, which again won't normally happen. But if you have a vowel under the last letter, you keep going. You say the vowel after you say the consonant. Sha, sha. Then we have shab. We have shata. We have shaba. Line 2, we have b. We have ba. We have baba. We have bash. We have bata. we have basha, we have bata. Line 3, we have t, ta, tata, tash, tasha, taba, tasha. Line 4, we have shab, tab, bab, shot, bat, and tot. Go ahead and stop the video. Do these again on your own till you're comfortable with them. And the final portion of our exercise, once again, stop the video, try it yourself, then I'll read across for you, then stop the video again until you feel comfortable with it. So go ahead and stop the video. Okay, line 5, shaba, basha, shata, tash, bata, taba, shashab, bashab, tashab, shashat, shaba, babash, shabash, tabash, babat, bat, Shabbat, and there's the word that we have learned these letters for. Shabbat. Should sound familiar to you. Bat, Shabbat, Shash, Shabbat. And of course, Shabbat is Sabbath. So here's your first vocabulary word now is the word for Sabbath, Shabbat. That's the end of these lessons for the first chapter. We'll be back looking again at chapter 2 for our next lesson, and we'll just be going through each chapter as we do it. So I hope to see you back here when we go through chapter 2. Thanks for sharing your time. Shalom.